Greetings, dear subscribers and casual listeners of my channel. When we think of the world of Harry Potter, we picture magical duels, Quidditch matches, the majestic halls of Hogwarts, and spells that can reshape reality. But behind this enchanted curtain lie strange contradictions, eerie questions, and disturbing gaps that no one ever dared to explain. One of the most puzzling elements is Transfiguration. At first glance, it seems like a typical school subject, turning one object into another. Harmless enough. But the deeper you dig into this type of magic, the more disturbing and even terrifying questions start to emerge. Let's take a look together into the darkest corners of this discipline and uncover the uncomfortable secrets of Transfiguration, the ones Hogwarts preferred to keep hidden. Enjoy the video. Number 1. Can Transfiguration work partially? Let's start with a question of magical boundaries. Is it possible to transfigure just part of an object or even a person? Could you turn an enemy's arm into wood, leaving the rest of the body untouched? It sounds like a highly effective way to stop someone without killing them, or turn someone's fingers into twigs so they can't hold their wand, or their legs into stone so they can't move. But if magic requires full control over an object, perhaps selective transfiguration is impossible. Still, cases like these would be perfect for duels, or even for torture. So why don't we ever see this used in the books? Maybe because it's too horrific, even for the magical world. Number 2. What happens to serious injuries? Now let's view transfiguration through the lens of medicine. Suppose someone is gravely wounded, there's no time, they're bleeding out and healing seems impossible. But what if you transfigure them into stone? Would that pause their condition? Could you buy time while searching for help and then turn them back, potentially saving their life? If yes, this could be a medical revolution. But what if the process destroys their internal biology, turning flesh into mineral? Then what happens when they're changed back? Are the injuries gone? Or worse, are there new, unknown damages? There are too few answers. Which leads to the haunting idea. The magic children learn at Hogwarts may be far more dangerous than it appears. Number 3. What happens to consciousness during transfiguration? Here's one of the most chilling questions. Where does consciousness go when someone is transfigured? If a rat is turned into a goblet, does it know what's happening? Can it feel the cold touch of metal, hear the clink of a spoon? And if it's a person? If you are turned into a chair, do you stay aware? Does your mind go silent? Or are you trapped in silence, unable to scream? If consciousness remains, transfiguration becomes a form of pure psychological torture, to be touched, used, unable to move, scream, or even cry. That's worse than dementors. So why don't wizards use this in combat, or do they, in secret? Number 4. Where does the mask go? Now we reach the most fundamental question of all. In Transfiguration class, a mouse is turned into a stool. Fine, until you ask, where does the mass come from? The mouse weighs about 300 grams, a wooden stool, at least 10 kilograms. Does magic create matter out of nothing? Violate conservation of mass? Pull it from a parallel dimension? And in reverse, if you turn a stool into a teaspoon, where does the rest go? Does it vanish into thin air? If wizards can manipulate matter freely, why don't they do this on a grand scale? Where is the leftover mass stored? Or does magic just fool perception and create the illusion of weight? From a physics standpoint, this is the discovery of the century. But oddly, no one seems to care, except viewers of this channel. Number 5. What happens to the body in transfigured form? Imagine you've been turned into a chair. Someone angrily kicks it and breaks a leg. When you return to your human form, will you have a broken bone? Or worse, will you be dead? Even scarier, imagine being turned into a vase. Someone drops it, it shatters. In that instant, did your life end? Magic becomes terrifying, not from malice, but from reckless accidents. And yet at Hogwarts, students casually transform animals into objects and back. Who ensures that no one makes a critical mistake? Where is the line between school practice and moral catastrophe? Number 6. Are you really not allowed to transfigure food? We all know about the Gamp's law of elemental transfiguration. Food cannot be created from nothing. That's a hard rule. You can only move it, duplicate it, or slightly alter it. But here's a strange idea. Suppose you transfigure a glass into a rat. That rat moves, breathes, has blood and muscle. Now, what if you cook it? Would it become real food? Creepy, yes, but magically logical. If transfiguration creates living tissue, then why shouldn't it be edible? Maybe the issue is in the fine print. All transfiguration is imperfect. So you have to wonder what part of the glass remains inside the rat. And could eating it kill you if beneath the flesh it's still silica? Number 7. Can you erase someone's identity through transfiguration? And now the darkest question of all. What if you constantly transfigure someone over and over? Today they're a cat, tomorrow a rock, then a book, then a spoon, then a hat, then back to human. Repeat endlessly. What happens to their identity? Does their sense of self disintegrate? Does the soul dissolve, fragmented by endless change? If the mind is tied to the body, perhaps all those transformations gradually erase memories, emotions, and personality, leaving only a hollow shell or a lunatic. But if the soul exists separately from the body, then we face an even deeper question. At what level does magic touch the soul, and why do we still know nothing about it? Number 8. What prevents the use of transfiguration for immortality? Dumbledore was over 150 years old, yet he never tried to make himself young. His hands were thin, his face lined. After putting on the cursed ring, his skin turned black and withered. "I have no time to be another Horcrux hunter," he said with a faint smile, half-blood prince. If anyone could have used transfiguration to repair his dying body, it was him. But he didn't. That silence speaks. Perhaps transfiguration cannot fix the soul's decay. Perhaps turning old flesh into young flesh is just an illusion, a mask over bones that still ache beneath the spell. Imagine Voldemort, desperate for immortality, splitting his soul, hiding in shadows, drinking unicorn blood. If transfiguration could grant eternal life, why didn't he use it? Why go through so many dark rituals? Maybe because transforming the body doesn't change what's inside. Maybe the magic wears off. Or worse, maybe every transformation chips away at the self until the wizard is no longer human. The books never give rules for this. But in a world where death is feared and fought with such desperation, the absence of this method says everything. Some magics are forbidden not by law, but by truth. Number 9. Why isn't transfiguration used for everyday purposes? When Harry stayed at the Burrow, Molly Weasley cooked, cleaned, knitted, and mended with ease. She used magic constantly. Dishes washed themselves, sweaters danced into drawers. But never once did she transfigure old socks into new ones. "Here you are, dear," she said, handing Harry a pair with a mismatched heel, goblet of fire. Why not transform them into something perfect? If transfiguration could do that, wouldn't every wizard use it to avoid shopping? Maybe they don't because it's simply too draining. McGonagall taught the subject with strict precision, often warning how one wrong flick could lead to disaster. Philosopher's Stone. Turning a matchstick into a needle was hard enough. What about transforming a torn boot into polished leather? If every cup of coffee required as much focus as a full duel, no wonder even skilled wizards prefer a kettle. Magic, it seems, comes with limits. Not just legal ones, but practical ones too. Number 10. Can Muggles use transfigured objects? Imagine Arthur Weasley transfiguring a block of firewood into a mobile phone, beaming with pride. "Fascinating things, these Muggle gadgets," he'd say, eyes wide. But when he hands it to a Muggle, nothing happens. No ringtone. No signal. Just silence, because transfiguration mimics appearance, not function. The wood looks like a phone, but inside it's still wood. No circuits, no SIM card, no logic board. The Muggle taps the screen. Nothing. It's enchanted, Arthur shrugs, embarrassed. Thought it might work. Order of the Phoenix. Magic, in this sense, is only skin deep. It tricks the eye, not the world. If Transfiguration truly created full-functioning tech, wizards wouldn't need radios. They'd make them from rocks, but they don't. Mr. Weasley tinkers with real plugs and wires. Wizards ride brooms, not motorcycles, unless they're enchanted like Sirius's, because without true tech inside, a transformed object is hollow, and Muggles, they notice. Maybe that's why the Statute of Secrecy holds. Not because Muggles can't see magic, but because Transfiguration breaks when they touch it. Number 11. What happens to the magical power of transfigured items? In Deathly Hallows, when Harry uses Draco's wand, he notices it feels different, less loyal, less responsive. Wands are not just tools, Ollivander once said. They are partners, Half-Blood Prince. So what happens if you transfigure one into a pencil? Would the wand's allegiance still hum beneath the wood? Could a skilled wizard detect the lingering magic? Imagine Snape walking past a desk, pausing and narrowing his eyes at an ordinary pencil. He raises his wand and murmurs something soft. The pencil twitches. A flicker of elderwood peeks through. "Who are you hiding from, Potter?" he whispers. If Transfiguration never goes all the way, as Professor McGonagall once warned, then a magical core might still pulse beneath the disguise. Yet no one in Hogwarts seems to learn how to sense this. Perhaps the art of identifying transfigured objects is as rare as legilimency, or maybe it's simply too dangerous to teach. But the question remains, can a disguised object still function? Could a transfigured time-turner still turn time? Could a Horcrux, reshaped into a silver spoon, still whisper madness into its holder's ear? If the answer is yes, then every drawer, every shelf in the wizarding world becomes suspect. Every harmless item, a potential trap. Number 12. Transfiguration and the Age of Objects. Can you create antiques? Fred and George Weasley once sold enchanted hats that made people invisible, briefly, before turning their heads purple. "They're not exactly ministry-approved," George admitted, Half-Blood Prince. Now imagine them in another business, turning plastic chairs into Georgian antiques. The idea isn't far-fetched. With their charm and transfiguration knowledge, they could transform cheap junk into creaking, polished, worm-eaten masterpieces. But would those antiques fool a spell designed to detect age? Or would the magic begin to wear off the moment the collector proudly sat down? Transfiguration seems to alter form, not time. McGonagall's lesson was clear. Transfiguration is some of the most complex and dangerous magic you will learn at Hogwarts, Sorcerer's Stone. Dangerous because it changes essence, but not necessarily history. A new chair made to look like it's from 1782 might look the part, smell the part, even rot the part, but its magical signature would still read modern. Just as Polyjuice Potion can mimic someone's appearance, but not their memories, a transfigured antique might crumble under scrutiny. Or worse, revert to its true form right when the buyer's guests arrive for tea. Number 13. Where does an Animagus's clothing go? When Sirius Black transformed into Padfoot, a massive black dog, no one ever stopped to ask, where did his prison clothes go? He would vanish from sight in one shape and reappear in another, fully dressed or entirely animal. There's no mention of him folding his robes or tying his wand to his paw. Sirius turned into the great shaggy black dog, says the text, prisoner of Azkaban, and with that, all signs of humanity, including his clothing, simply vanished. But the fabric must go somewhere. If it doesn't fall to the ground or rip, does it dissolve into magical essence, or does it get absorbed into the form, hidden in some pocket of magical space? Consider Rita Skeeter. She was an unregistered animagus, turning into a beetle small enough to sit unnoticed in Hermione's hair. Yet when Hermione trapped her in a jar, she emerged in full human size, complete with her ugly handbag and green robes. "I kept her in a jar," Hermione said, with pride, goblet of fire. But how could her clothes shrink with her and return untouched? Does her handbag compress like a magical tent? If transfiguration violates physics, animagus transformations seem to mock them entirely. The human body shrinks or grows, the mass condenses or multiplies, and the clothing obeys rules we never learn. Not even Dumbledore offers an explanation, and Hermione, usually the first to ask questions, never raises a word of doubt. Maybe that's the charm. Maybe animagi exist in that quiet space where magic refuses to be dissected, where we're meant to accept the impossible and move on, but it lingers. If a grown man can shrink into a rat and carry his clothes, his wand, maybe even his secrets inside that furry little body, what else is being hidden? Perhaps the laws of magic weren't written to be understood. Perhaps they were designed to be obeyed in silence. Number 14, can the soul be transfigured? When Tom Riddle split his soul to create Horcruxes, he showed the wizarding world that a soul isn't just an abstract idea. It's something that can be fractured, hidden, even trapped. In Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince, Dumbledore explained, Lord Voldemort has encased parts of his soul in objects, making himself immortal. If a soul can be divided and bound to a locket, what's stopping someone from using Transfiguration to do the same? Imagine transforming a person into a ring. The body is gone, but is the soul still curled inside the gold band, silent and watching? Let's say a young witch, out of panic, transforms her dying brother into a crystal statue to preserve him. Years pass. The statue is moved, cracked, eventually forgotten. Could his soul still be trapped within, unable to move on, screaming when no one can hear? This isn't far-fetched. We've seen enchanted objects carry emotions like the cursed diary in Chamber of Secrets. The diary kept a part of his 16-year-old self, said Dumbledore. That version of Riddle wasn't just memory, it had intent, will, hunger. And if memory can linger, why not a soul? The question gets darker. What if someone wanted to trap a soul on purpose, transfigure a person, then bind their essence into a wand, a book, a pair of shoes? Suddenly the object feels wrong. It hums when touched, whispers in the night. We know from Deathly Hallows that some items feel heavy with dark magic. The locket Horcrux, for instance, filled Harry with rage. Could that rage have been the remnants of the soul crying out? Perhaps cursed artifacts aren't cursed at all, they're haunted. Their emotions not enchantments, but remnants of a mind once alive. Transfiguration, if used carelessly, may damage the very thing that makes someone human. If it changes flesh into stone, what might it do to spirit? Does the soul warp along with the body? Or does it remain unchanged, trapped in a shell it cannot escape? No one knows, and perhaps no one dares to find out. But the idea that a soul could be twisted, lost, or imprisoned by a single flick of a wand lingers. Unspoken in the corridors of Hogwarts, buried in dusty books, no one dares open. Number 15, why isn't Transfiguration used in magical duels? Of all the branches of magic taught at Hogwarts, Transfiguration is perhaps the most dramatic. It allows the wizard to alter the very nature of reality, turn a matchstick into a needle, a teacup into a rat, or, in more advanced forms, even transform one living being into another. Minerva McGonagall, its most distinguished modern practitioner, could become a cat in a blink, and did so often, commanding awe in her students. Yet for all its raw power, Transfiguration is curiously absent in the most desperate and deadly contexts, magical duels. In scenes such as the Battle of the Department of Mysteries, or the final stand at Hogwarts, one might expect Transfiguration to reign supreme. Instead, spells of force, fire, and forceful disarming dominate. Why? During the climactic duel between Dumbledore and Voldemort in the Ministry Atrium, magic soared to its most spectacular. Fire became serpents, water became shields, and glass became a rain of daggers. But even here, despite Dumbledore's reputation as a master of all magical arts, true transfiguration is curiously restrained. He animates a fountain to protect Harry, a form of conjuration, and sends torrents of water to smother flame. Yet not once does he transfigure Voldemort himself or his wand into something useless. One must wonder why the headmaster, known for turning tables into pigs as a young man, refrained. It is not because the technique is unknown. In the Chamber of Secrets, we learn that even second years are expected to attempt turning animals into goblets. And in The Half-Blood Prince, McGonagall demonstrates her skill in animating statues and suits of armor to fight. Theoretically, nothing stops a wizard from turning a Death Eater's wand into a bouquet of flowers, or the Death Eater into a hedgehog. Yet no such acts are recorded in the heat of battle. The spell arsenal in duels remains narrow: Expelliarmus, Stupefy, Protego, Sectum Sempra. Part of the explanation may lie in the nature of Transfiguration itself. As McGonagall repeatedly reminds her students, Transfiguration is complex and dangerous. Transfiguration is some of the most complex and dangerous magic you will learn at Hogwarts, she tells the class in Philosopher's Stone. Anyone messing around in my class will leave and not come back. The warning is stern and serious. Changing the nature of matter or living beings involves manipulating deeply rooted magical laws, and missteps can be catastrophic. Hermione, the brightest witch of her age, once botched a spell and ended up with a partially transformed set of ears after trying to turn herself into Millicent Bulstrode. The degree of concentration required is immense. Unlike a shield charm which can be cast on reflex, or a stunning spell which flies from the wand with practiced ease, Transfiguration demands precision. In a classroom with a quiet setting and a single object of focus, a wizard might succeed. In the chaotic whirl of a duel with curses flying and adrenaline flooding the body, this calm focus is shattered. Imagine trying to change a charging enemy's wand into a feather duster while dodging a blasting curse. One lapse in focus and the spell fizzles, or worse, backfires. This need for control might also explain why Transfiguration leans so heavily on line of sight and emotional neutrality. Anger, fear, and haste are the enemies of Transfiguration. But duels are composed of precisely those elements. Harry, while under stress, often resorts to simpler, immediate spells: Expelliarmus, Impedimenta, Reducto. He does not stop to ponder the symbolic transformation of aggression into harmlessness through alchemical change. He acts to survive. Yet this does not explain the total absence of offensive transfiguration, even from the most skilled and composed duelists. Dumbledore, Snape, and McGonagall, figures who can cast non-verbally and with apparent ease, do not attempt to transform their opponents or tools. There may be a deeper reason. Ethics, wizarding culture, steeped in centuries of magical tradition, may hold certain unspoken rules of engagement. Just as Muggle societies developed rules for dueling with pistols or swords, wizards may follow a code that restrains their more violent capabilities. Turning a man into a toad might win the battle, but it edges too close to dark magic. After all, where is the line between transfiguration and torture? When a wizard is transfigured into a ferret, as Draco Malfoy was by Moody, actually Barty Crouch Jr., McGonagall is horrified. "We never use transfiguration as a punishment. Surely Professor Dumbledore told you that?" she scolds. This suggests an underlying principle that altering a human being's form against their will is a breach of magical ethics. It dehumanizes, degrades. In combat, it is not just impractical, it is abhorrent. Moreover, transfiguration may not be permanent. As J.K. Rowling once explained in an interview, all transfigurations are essentially temporary unless supported by immensely powerful magic. Once the spellcaster's focus is broken, or worse, once the spellcaster is stunned or killed, the transformation may reverse. A Death Eater turned into a rock could easily return to full form the moment the spell lifts. In contrast, a good old-fashioned Stupefy drops an enemy for hours. Why risk complexity when simplicity wins? There's also the question of magical resistance. Just as some creatures resist Muggle attacks, some wizards might be resistant to certain magical effects, especially if their will is strong or their magical core powerful. Voldemort, whose will was iron and soul-fractured, might be immune to the subtle persuasion of a Transfiguration spell. Spells that push or blast are more likely to overcome such defenses than those that attempt to reshape the self. Consider also the role of wand movement and incantation length. While Avada Kedavra is infamously quick, unforgivingly so, many Transfiguration spells involve complicated gestures. A misaligned flick or mispronounced Latin root can cause backfire. In a life-or-death scenario, the efficiency of a clean, disarming spell outweighs the elegance of metamorphosis. The duel becomes a matter of rhythm and repetition, not artistry. Number 16. How long does a Transfiguration last? In Professor McGonagall's Transfiguration class, students were always warned about the complexity and danger of the subject. Transfiguration is some of the most complex and dangerous magic you will learn at Hogwarts, she said, in Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone. But what was never truly explained, even in her stern and detailed lessons, was the precise nature of how long a transfiguration could last. Could one turn a stone into a goblet forever? Could a rat stay a snuffbox until the end of time? Or was every act of transformation on a ticking clock destined to collapse without warning? The books give us subtle hints, but no firm answers. When Ron turned Scabbers yellow and gave him a pink bow in Prisoner of Azkaban, the effect was cosmetic and temporary. Yet in another example, Professor McGonagall turned her desk into a pig and back again within seconds. The suggestion is that transfiguration is reversible, but reversibility implies the magic is not necessarily permanent. If it can be reversed at will, it might also reverse on its own. But when and how would one know? In Goblet of Fire, Moody, Barty Crouch Jr. in disguise, turned Draco Malfoy into a ferret. It took Professor McGonagall's intervention to restore him to human form. Does that mean the spell would not have worn off on its own, or would Malfoy have eventually reverted without help? The lack of clarity is unsettling. If a transformation like that doesn't naturally expire, then who decides its end? And what if the caster is incapacitated, or worse, dead? Consider a hypothetical but entirely plausible scenario. A young witch named Beatrice, studying in her 6th year at Hogwarts, wishes to gift her mother a sapphire ring. She lacks the galleons to buy one, but excels in transfiguration. She takes a lump of coal from the fireplace in the Gryffindor common room, transfigures it into a ring with an impressive blue gem, polishes it, and boxes it with a red ribbon. Her mother beams with joy upon receiving it. She wears it every day. But what if, 4 weeks later, while washing dishes, the ring dissolves into a sooty chunk, staining her fingers black and revealing the deception? Would Beatrice be morally at fault? Or was she simply ignorant of the unstable nature of her magic? There's something even more disturbing to consider. If transfigurations are temporary and less sustained or made permanent through unknown methods, then every transfigured object in the wizarding world becomes a potential hazard. Imagine a wizard who transfigures a log into a bench at a picnic. If it reverts mid-meal, an elderly witch might crash to the ground. Or worse, what if a makeshift bridge conjured through transfiguration over a deep chasm suddenly reverts to branches and twigs unable to hold the weight of those crossing? In Order of the Phoenix, when Harry and his classmates practice turning objects into animals, the transformations are incomplete and unstable. A pincushion becomes a hedgehog but retains traces of the original shape, spikes made of sewing needles, legs that are still oddly square. This imperfection hints at an inherent fragility. When asked whether such partial transformations last, Professor McGonagall merely urges them to try again, never elaborating on what becomes of a half-formed animal over time. What makes Transfiguration especially dangerous is the illusion of permanence. To the untrained eye, a quill turned into a flower may appear real, even smell like roses. But if that illusion falters hours or days later, the person pressing it to their nose may inhale ink dust or end up with a sharp tip in their eye. Wizards trust Transfiguration far more than they should. Perhaps that is the true danger, not the spell itself, but the faith placed in its durability. There are darker implications still. In Deathly Hallows, we see that people can be turned into inanimate objects. The most chilling case is when Voldemort transfigures Charity Burbage's corpse to suspend it above the table. If such a transformation could be done on a living person, say, turning a wizard into a chair, would they remain alive? Would the transformation expire, and if so, would the victim be conscious upon return, or suffer brain damage, or die from shock? One story whispered among former Hogwarts students concerns a Ravenclaw boy in the 1940s who turned a cat into a goblet to impress a girl. He used the goblet daily, unaware that the spell was degrading. One evening during dinner, the goblet began to change. Fur appeared on the rim, the stem thickened, and a tail slithered around his hand. It collapsed in his palm with a screech. No one spoke to him again after that night. The girl transferred to Beauxbatons. Whether the story is true or a cautionary tale, it serves the same purpose. Transformations do not always hold. What makes the danger so difficult to manage is the lack of visible warning signs. Potions may change color or emit smoke when going bad. Charms may flicker or weaken, but Transfiguration gives no such courtesy. It holds until it doesn't. The transfigured object behaves exactly like the real thing. A feather transformed into a spoon can stir soup, be washed, even bent slightly with force. There's no aura, no shimmer, no magical hum, only silence. Number 17, what happens if you transfigure a magical artifact? In the dark, damp heart of the Forest of Dean, when Harry clutched the locket Horcrux around his neck, a creeping malevolence whispered into his thoughts. The medallion was no ordinary object. It throbbed with a piece of soul, a fragment of Voldemort's poisoned essence. As long as it remained intact, it spread despair, doubt, and a chill that even magic could not dispel. Now imagine, what if that very medallion had been transfigured? What if, instead of a chain and locket, it had taken the shape of a mundane, overlooked pebble among thousands on a riverbed? The question burns, would its darkness still seep into minds, or would the magic vanish, hidden under layers of enchantment, waiting to be triggered? Transfiguration in the Harry Potter universe is not merely about changing shape. It bends the very fabric of matter, remolding properties, purpose, and perception. Professor McGonagall taught students to turn matchsticks into needles, foundational exercise, but a Horcrux is not a matchstick. It is an abomination, a container for the torn human soul. When magic this dark is confronted with transfiguration, the consequences may not be as tame as we're led to believe. The process might not neutralize the darkness, it might bury it, or worse, distort it. Dumbledore once said, "You must be the one to kill him, Harry. It must be willingly done." He knew that Horcruxes were more than enchanted items. They were tethered to life, violence, and intention. The soul inside the locket screamed when Ron stabbed it with the sword of Gryffindor, its apparition attacking his mind in a flurry of psychological torment. That suggests that the magic inside was alive, self-aware, reacting to external changes. Would it have felt pain if someone tried to transfigure it? Would it have retaliated? No example in canon explicitly confirms that a Horcrux or any major magical artifact was ever successfully transfigured. However, we see hints that magical objects resist transformation. In Goblet of Fire, when Moody, really Barty Crouch Jr., turns Draco Malfoy into a ferret, it's instantaneous. But when he discusses magical concealment, he warns of the limitations of transfiguration, especially with complex objects. There is a reason why protective enchantments are layered manually on items like the Marauder's Map or the Sorcerer's Stone. These artifacts are not merely charmed, they are resistant to casual manipulation. Take the example of the Time Turner. In Order of the Phoenix, a room in the Department of Mysteries is filled with destroyed time turners, some broken beyond recognition, their mechanisms twisted. If a time turner, an object with magic as unstable as time manipulation, were transfigured into, say, a spoon, would the flow of time stutter, lag, or collapse into a loop? The Ministry kept these devices under strict regulation, partly because tampering could trigger magical feedback loops. In that context, transfiguration could be not just dangerous, but catastrophic. The essence of transfiguration lies in changing how the magical world perceives the object, but perception does not equal essence. If a Horcrux is turned into a stone, the visual and physical aspects change, but the magic, the embedded soul, remains. Imagine a wizard picking up an ordinary-looking stone, unaware that it bears the fragment of a genocidal maniac. Would he feel the pull of despair as Harry did, or would the soul, enraged at being imprisoned within a lowly rock, lash out violently, cracking the mind of its new bearer? Consider the cursed opal necklace at Borgin and Burke's. It had a reputation for killing 19 Muggles. Its power was not visible but fatal upon touch. If someone transfigured it into a porcelain teacup, would the death curse remain dormant or find new expression? Perhaps the curse would attach itself to the lips of anyone drinking from it. Magic finds a way, it adapts. It resists suppression. Like a virus, it mutates when provoked. This may explain why no one in the books ever discusses transfiguring magical items with intrinsic power. Molly Weasley enchants knives to peel potatoes, but she does not transfigure her clock that tracks her family's locations. Arthur Weasley collects Muggle objects and enchants them, but never does he transfigure them into something else. There's an unspoken rule. Transfiguration is for things, magic is for function. Mixing the two can rupture the natural flow of enchantment. The very act of transfiguration is temporary unless made permanent through powerful spells. Professor McGonagall's lectures made that clear. The question then becomes, what happens when temporary transformation wears off? If a cursed ring is changed into a twig and left in the forest, what happens when the spell fades? Would it reappear violently, perhaps triggered by moonlight or proximity to blood, as many dark artifacts are? Or worse, what if the return is incomplete, making the ring half twig, half metal, and wholly cursed? Tom Riddle was a master of subtlety. He concealed Horcruxes in the most unexpected places, yet even he did not transfigure them. He enchanted the cup of Hufflepuff, the diadem of Ravenclaw, and his own diary, but he chose their original forms with care. Items tied to history, legacy, and symbolism. If transfiguration had been a safe or effective way to disguise a Horcrux, wouldn't he have used it? The fact that he didn't is evidence in itself. Either he feared magical instability, or he knew that transformation might undo the spellwork, possibly threatening the integrity of his split soul. The sword of Gryffindor absorbed basilisk venom. It adapted, grew stronger, it recognized worth. That level of magical consciousness implies that some objects in the wizarding world possess awareness. Transfiguring such an object might not be a one-sided act. It could be a battle of wills. What if the sword resisted? What if, in its altered form, it retained its properties but lost its sense of self? The magical ecosystem, so delicately balanced, could be thrown into chaos by such interference. Number 18. Can transfiguration change the age of a living being? Of all the spells taught at Hogwarts, transfiguration is the most quietly terrifying. It is not as dramatic as casting a Patronus or as violent as dueling with curses, but its implications, if pushed to their philosophical and magical extremes, crack the very bedrock of existence. Professor McGonagall herself warned students early on that transfiguration is some of the most complex and dangerous magic you will learn at Hogwarts. Anyone messing around in my class will leave and not come back. And yet, despite these dire warnings, we rarely consider how far its reach might extend. We are taught that transfiguration can turn animals into goblets, porcupines into pincushions, and teacups into turtles. But what about the transfiguration of time? Can transfiguration, while in theory or in practice, change not just the shape of a living creature, but its age? The question may sound absurd, but consider the logic. If Hermione Granger could successfully transfigure a beetle into a button, then why shouldn't she, at least theoretically, be able to transfigure a baby into a grown man or an old wizard into a toddler? The fundamental mechanics of transfiguration deal with changing the molecular, even metaphysical properties of matter and living beings. The spell Avifors conjures birds from inanimate objects. The spell Draconifors animates statues into dragons. If such transformations are possible, why should the aging process, a mere function of biology, be off limits? Of course, there are no known examples in the Harry Potter books of wizards using transfiguration to manipulate age. Time travel, yes, as with the time turner used by Hermione in The Prisoner of Azkaban, but no one is seen aging someone up or down by spell alone. Still, the silence in canon only makes the question more intriguing. If it hasn't been done, is it because it can't be, or because it shouldn't? Imagine, for example, that a mother, desperate to protect her infant in the midst of a wizarding war, transfigures her baby into a 10-year-old. If that transformation is merely skin deep, the child might still think and feel like an infant, trapped in a larger, clumsier body. But if the spell were complete, if it truly changed the physical and cognitive development of the child, then that would suggest transfiguration can override nature itself. A child could be made ready for Hogwarts in a single evening. A young aura could be aged into an old man to retire early and vanish into obscurity, and then perhaps aged down again for a second career. Such magic would not merely be a matter of illusion. Polyjuice potion, after all, can change a person's appearance into another's, but cannot replicate their memories, powers, or intelligence. When Hermione accidentally used a polyjuice potion laced with cat hair, the result was a grotesque physical hybrid, not a feline mind in a girl's body, but transfiguration done at its highest levels is more profound. It is not an illusion, and it is a reality shift. When Professor McGonagall turns into a tabby cat, she does not merely look like one, she is one, at least in form. Her mind remains, but her physiology adapts fully to the animal she becomes. If a similar transfiguration were applied to age, it would beg uncomfortable questions. Would a transfigured child given the body of a grown man be suddenly gifted with the musculature, brain structure, and hormones of adulthood? Would he understand things differently? Could he fall in love, vote, or take exams? Or would he remain, at core, a frightened child looking through adult eyes? The Ministry of Magic, we can imagine, would regulate such practices ferociously if they existed. Imagine criminals aging themselves down to escape Azkaban, or spies transforming into children to infiltrate schools. Imagine a politician who grows 10 years younger every time he gives a public address. The implications are nightmarish. And yet, for those powerful enough, those curious enough, the temptation must be real. It is difficult to ignore the philosophical implications too. Albus Dumbledore once remarked, "It is the unknown we fear when we look upon death and darkness, nothing more." But perhaps even more terrifying is the known, the certainty of aging, the slow decline of the body, the creeping decay of the mind. If transfiguration could halt or reverse this process, wouldn't the entire wizarding world be clamoring for it? Wouldn't the wizened figures of the Wizengamot all look 25? Wouldn't Alastair Moody, ravaged by years of aura service, choose to rejuvenate his broken body? But he does not. Nor does Dumbledore, who allows his beard to grow long and silver, who leans more heavily on his staff with each passing year. If age could be rewritten with a wand, why would any powerful wizard not choose to wield it? The answer, perhaps, lies in the deep-rooted laws of magic. Not those written by man, but those embedded in the universe itself. Magic has always had limits, and even the most gifted witches and wizards are warned not to tamper with certain lines. When Fred and George Weasley test age lines around the Goblet of Fire, they end up sprouting white hair and wrinkles, evidence that even magical tampering with time and age is dangerous. "We're not stupid, you know," Fred grumbled as he nursed his suddenly arthritic hands. "We know we're not allowed to cross the line." But they tried anyway, and paid the price. It is worth noting that time magic itself is treated with exceptional caution. The Ministry of Magic once maintained a vast hall of time-turners, all shattered during the Battle of the Department of Mysteries. These fragile hourglasses allowed backward travel by minutes, or hours, not years, and their dangers were manifold. Even a small change in the past risked catastrophic ripple effects. Age-changing via transfiguration would bypass these limits, and perhaps create worse consequences. There's also the matter of biological integrity. If a wizard were transfigured into an elderly version of himself, would his organs truly age? Would his lungs weaken, his bones become brittle, his eyesight dim? Or would the spell only simulate these effects, and if they were real, with the body truly changed, then what happens if the spell is reversed? Could years of decay be undone, or would the body collapse from the trauma? One might consider the case of Peter Pettigrew, who lived as a rat for over a decade. While this was an Animagus transformation, not transfiguration per se, it provides a precedent for extended, complex bodily change. When he reverted to human form, he had retained his mind, his memories, and presumably his age. He was no younger, no older. His time as a rat did not freeze his biology. If anything, it suggests that magic adapts to time but does not control it. This brings us to a deeper theory that time, unlike matter or energy, resists magical manipulation. It can be danced around, nudged, momentarily distorted, but not fundamentally rewritten. A transfiguration spell can change a beetle into a button, but not make the beetle forget it was alive. A rat can become a man, but not a younger man. Magic might twist form and function, but age may be a sacred domain, the last stronghold of the natural order. And yet Dumbledore himself once hinted at the unnatural in the process of aging. His confrontation with Voldemort in the Department of Mysteries included a remark, "There is nothing worse than death, Dumbledore," to which the old headmaster replied, "You are quite wrong." Dumbledore had long accepted his age. Voldemort had not. The Dark Lord sought not only to avoid death, but to avoid aging, to remain in the prime of life forever. His methods were horrific: Horcruxes, parasitic possession, rituals of rebirth, but they served to prove a point. No amount of transfiguration, even in Voldemort's arsenal, was enough to stop time's progression. Even the elixir of life provided by the Philosopher's Stone does not truly make one younger. Nicolas Flamel lived over 6 centuries, but he aged, slowly perhaps, but visibly. "It means," Dumbledore said, "that he and his wife will have enough elixir stored to set their affairs in order and then die." Immortality is not the same as youth, so if transfiguration could change age, why would anyone choose these darker, more painful routes? Why suffer the indignity of living as a wraith, as Voldemort did, if a simple spell could return youth or halt decay? The answer may lie in magical ethics or in magical physics. Perhaps the body can be reshaped, but the soul remains fixed to its own timeline. Perhaps tampering with age using transfiguration results in madness or death or spiritual rupture. The soul, after all, is not discussed often in transfiguration textbooks, but it is the bedrock of magical identity. What happens when a 17-year-old soul is stuffed into a 7-year-old's body, or vice versa? If this were possible, it would have world-changing implications. Azkaban might be repurposed into a facility where offenders are aged into senility as punishment, or criminals could be aged backward, losing their memories, becoming infants once more, free from their crimes, but robbed of themselves. Even education would change. Students could be aged up temporarily for adult exams, then reverted to adolescence. Childhood itself could become a phase skipped over at will. But such magic, if it exists, is locked behind doors we are not allowed to open. Perhaps Dumbledore knew the consequences. Perhaps McGonagall, in her mastery of Transfiguration, encountered a student or experiment that went too far. Or perhaps the book simply never mentioned this branch of magic because the wizarding world agreed, long ago, never to pursue it. Still, the silence is telling. In a world where broomsticks fly and portraits talk, where souls split and ghosts linger, the absence of age-manipulating transfiguration is not an oversight. It is a warning. Number 19. What happens when magical creatures are transfigured? The classroom was tense that afternoon in Professor McGonagall's Transfiguration class. The subject was complex enough, transforming a teapot into a tortoise, but the air thickened noticeably when one brave, perhaps reckless Ravenclaw raised a question. What if we tried this on a magical creature? McGonagall's lips thinned, and her eyes, sharp as a falcon's, narrowed just enough to signal danger. "You will not," she answered. But the silence that followed wasn't agreement. It was the weight of unspoken curiosity, of doors unopened. To imagine turning a hippogriff into a piece of furniture seems absurd, ghastly even, yet the magical world constantly manipulates the boundaries between the living and the lifeless. Students are taught to turn hedgehogs into pincushions and snails into teacups, but these creatures, while living, lack the complex magical makeup of beings like centaurs, dragons, and indeed hippogriffs. In Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them, Newt Scamander classified hippogriffs as XXXX-rated creatures, not only for their danger, but also for the intense magic that pulses through them like a second heartbeat. That kind of innate magic is not passive. It breathes. It resists. The issue becomes even more tangled when considering magical cause, a theory often whispered in the corridors of the Department of Magical Creatures and sometimes muttered in the darker alcoves of the Department of Mysteries. While the books do not confirm the theory directly, fan interpretations suggest that magical creatures possess cause not unlike those in wands, not a physical object necessarily, but a concentration of raw, organic magic capable of independent reaction. A spell that interferes with such a core doesn't simply alter, it disrupts, and disruptions in magic rarely end without consequences. A theoretical case in Hogwarts' unofficial archives, a tale rarely told but documented in McGonagall's private notes, details a young wizard in the early 1900s who attempted to transfigure a Grindylow into a book for his final examination. The Grindylow, though smaller and seemingly less complex than a hippogriff, retaliated. The magic backfired. The result was grotesque, half parchment, half living tissue, bound together in a pulsing, twitching amalgam. The student was expelled. The book was destroyed, but the memory remained, shared only in whispers among professors. Magical creatures, unlike ordinary animals, seem to possess a resistance mechanism, not merely defensive instincts, but an internal reaction to invasive magic. When Hermione Granger attempted to hex a pair of Cornish pixies during Gilderoy Lockhart's infamous lesson, the spell misfired. "Even Pescipixie Pestanomi didn't work," she had complained. It wasn't just bad spell work. The pixies, chaotic and imbued with erratic, magical energy, had likely disrupted the spell's matrix before it could land. Their very presence bent the rules of predictability. But what would happen if someone truly tried to transfigure a creature like Buckbeak into a divan? Consider the implications. Buckbeak, proud and fiercely sentient, is not a mindless beast. The intelligence in his eyes, the ceremony of his bow, speaks of a creature aware of status, respect, and insult. Transfiguration in its rawest form disregards that entirely. It imposes shape onto soul. If the soul resists, what then? Transfiguration is one of the most dangerous branches of magic, a truth McGonagall never hides. Transfiguration is some of the most complex and dangerous magic you will learn at Hogwarts, she warns in Philosopher's Stone. Even with inanimate objects, the process risks unintended consequences. In 1976, a seventh-year student accidentally merged a goblet with her own hand while attempting human-to-object transfiguration. She recovered, but the goblet's stem remained fused to her knuckles for weeks. Now imagine that danger compounded by a magical being's will. There's a theory, half proven, half feared, among unspeakables, that magical creatures react not only with resistance, but with reversal. Attempting to transform such beings might cause an echo effect. The spell collapses back into the caster, magnified. A phoenix, for example, whose life cycle is already a paradox of death and rebirth, might trigger a rebound so violent that the wand itself implodes. The magic doesn't disappear, it reacts, refracts, and returns. This phenomenon might explain an incident recorded in the Daily Prophet in 1972 in which a careless young wizard in Knockturn Alley attempted to transfigure a baby dragon into a suitcase. The result? The suitcase came to life, burst into flames and flew away. The shop was burned to the ground. Witnesses claimed the object had eyes that glowed with fury. No trace of the dragon or the suitcase was ever found. There's also the ethical question. Transfiguring an ordinary goat into a chair is already borderline cruel, though temporary and reversible. But to transfigure a sentient or semi-sentient creature like a unicorn, thestral, or even a troll is to violate something deeper. Albus Dumbledore once said, "You cannot force understanding through magic, only obedience." Transfiguration, when applied to a magical being, crosses from instruction into domination. It reshapes not just the body, but the being's essence. Even house elves, creatures bound by enchantments older than the ministry itself, are notoriously difficult to transfigure. During the Goblin Rebellions, wizards attempted to use transfiguration to neutralize magical servants. The spells worked momentarily, only for the transformed objects to dissolve within hours, the elves reappearing in different parts of the battlefield, angry and free. Some historians suggest that ancient bloodline magic protected them. Others believe that magical beings leave a kind of echo wherever they go, an imprint that resists alteration. In this light, it's no wonder Hogwarts enforces strict rules against using living magical beings for transfiguration practice. The Standard Book of Spells, Grade 4, states, "Students are strictly prohibited from attempting transfiguration on sentient or magical beings without direct supervision and ministry-level clearance." Well, the reason isn't just safety, it's unpredictability. A failed spell might not merely fizzle, it could corrupt the very nature of the object or the creature involved. There are darker implications too. If a magical core is forcibly restructured, could it become unstable? The Department of Magical Accidents and Catastrophes has an entire wing dedicated to transfiguration disasters. One file, marked Classified Level Black, mentions an unnamed wizard who tried to turn a banshee into a chandelier. The banshee's scream remained embedded in the object. Every night at midnight, it would cry. 3 people were driven mad before the artifact was destroyed. The ripple effects can extend beyond the object. Magical energy is not isolated, it flows, connects, reacts. Some scholars theorize that failed transfigurations leave behind magical scars, areas where the laws of magic thin. These fracture points become unstable, allowing wild magic to leak into the environment. In 1991, a swamp in Scotland known for unexplained magical fluxes was investigated. Traces of Sphinx magic were found, but no Sphinx had been seen there for over a century. The leading theory, a failed transfiguration created a permanent echo. And yet ambition persists. Some dark wizards actively seek to transfigure magical beings as a form of domination. One notorious case is that of Emmerich Goyle, ancestor to the well-known Goyle family, who tried to transfigure werewolves into guard dogs. The result was horrifying. The creatures lost their ability to shift back. They remained in limbo, part beast, part man, entirely broken. The Ministry was forced to hunt them down one by one. Even the shape of the transfigured object plays a role. A chair, for example, might seem innocuous, but chairs are symbols of status, control. To turn a proud, wild creature like a hippogriff into a symbol of submission is not merely transformation, it's humiliation. Such an act might not only cause magical resistance, but awaken something darker, rage, vengeance, magical backlash. There's one final tale, often told among the more philosophical students of Transfiguration. It's said that a wizard once tried to transform a lethifold into a cloak. The spell worked, or seemed to. The cloak was soft, black, perfect. But it absorbed heat. It made no sound. One day, the wizard wore it to bed and never woke up. The lethifold, they say, had simply waited. The Transfiguration had merely given. It knew form, not new purpose. Transfiguration, in its essence, is the art of rewriting reality. But magical creatures are reality. They're nodes in the magical web, living expressions of chaotic ancient forces. To edit them is to challenge the blueprint of magic itself. Some spells succeed, some fail, but some open doors that should remain closed. It is not cowardice to avoid transfiguring magical beings. It is wisdom. It is mercy. For in those rare moments when magic turns on its master, the result is not failure. It is revelation. And often, those revelations come at the cost of sanity, safety, or even life itself. Number 20. Can memories be transfigured? In the dungeons of Hogwarts, where the torches barely lit the cold stone walls and the air smelled of damp stone and forgotten secrets, Severus Snape once held a silvery strand of memory in his hand and placed it in the pensieve. The memory swirled, glowed, and revealed a scene from the past with eerie clarity. This act, mundane for a wizard of Snape's caliber, pointed to a truth few questioned deeply. Memories in the wizarding world were not simply internal fragments of thought. They were manipulable matter, tangible and luminous, extractable from the mind like threads of silk. If they could be removed, they could be altered. If they could be shared, they could be shaped. And if they could be shaped, could they not also be transformed? Albus Dumbledore once said, "Thoughts could leave deeper scars than almost anything else." He was not speaking figuratively. The wizarding world treated thoughts, emotions, and memories as almost physical entities. In Half-Blood Prince, we watch as Harry dives into Snape's memory to witness the moment when his father, James Potter, bullied a younger Snape by the Black Lake. The memory exists independently, vivid, and accessible. But what if it had been tampered with? What if it had been transformed before Harry saw it, not through the occlumency block Snape set up, but through something darker, something crafted with precision like Transfiguration? Transfiguration was the most elegant and dangerous of magical arts. Professor McGonagall warned her first years that Transfiguration is some of the most complex and dangerous magic you will learn at Hogwarts. Anyone messing around in my class will leave and not come back. It is the manipulation of form, of essence, a hedgehog into a pincushion, a teacup into a rat. But nowhere was it stated that the limits of Transfiguration were fixed to the physical world. In fact, Animagi, witches and wizards who could transform into animals, proved that Transfiguration could operate on the self. If the self could be transfigured, could not memory, as a product of the self, be transfigured as well? Consider Gilderoy Lockhart. His magical specialty was not memory charms, but rather their misuse. He stole memories, crafted false identities atop the blank canvases of minds, and paraded the resulting lies as personal glory. But memory charms, such as Obliviate, were brute tools. They erased, they rewrote, they did not refine. If a memory charm was a hammer, then Transfiguration of memory might be a scalpel. Imagine replacing a moment of shame with a false recollection of victory. Imagine turning grief into imagined joy. Such manipulation, if possible, would be irresistible to those who feared the truth. Bellatrix Lestrange's fanatical devotion to Voldemort, despite years in Azkaban, raises another disturbing question. Was her mind merely unbreakable, or was it preserved and sculpted by something deeper, something not unlike a self-imposed transformation of thought? Could it be that some memories were not just locked away, but consciously transfigured to feed obsession? Her madness was not the product of absence, but of presence, memories made grotesque, elevated, distorted like a funhouse mirror. The Department of Mysteries harbored the memory chamber, where silvery thoughts floated like stars in bottles. There, unspeakables experimented not only with retrieval, but according to rumor, with the very texture of memory. While the Ministry never confirmed these practices, stories persisted of prisoners who remembered entirely different lives, husbands who forgot wives, aurors who no longer recalled crimes. If this was merely the result of memory charms, why the secrecy? Why the isolation? Because perhaps they were not using charms at all. Perhaps they were reshaping memories through mental transfiguration. Voldemort's Horcruxes were crafted through murder, but their creation also required a tearing of the soul. Dumbledore explained, to confide a part of your soul in an object, you must first split your soul by committing murder. It is a violation. If the soul could be split and the mind could be stored in memory, then perhaps there was a deeper link between transfiguration, soulcraft, and recollection. What if a skilled practitioner could mold memory like clay, bending its light, refracting its meaning? In Deathly Hallows, Snape gives Harry a final gift, his most precious memories. These memories exonerate him, reveal truths, and change the course of a war. But what if Snape had wanted to deceive? What if he had altered those memories not through lies, but through transformation? If one were to take a painful truth and transfigure it into a noble sacrifice, would the pensive know the difference? Would the observer? The memory would appear just as vivid, just as emotional, just as true, but it would be fiction. This power, if it existed, would be indistinguishable from reality. It would be the most dangerous magic of all, not the killing curse, not the imperious, but the transformation of reality's memory. The mind is not a book, said Snape. It cannot be opened at will and examined at leisure. But that was only true for the untrained. In the hands of those who understood transfiguration beyond McGonagall's teachings, who applied it not to goblets but to guilt, what was memory if not just another material? Bertha Jorkins vanished in Albania and returned only as a ghost of herself. Dumbledore later revealed that Voldemort had extracted information from her by force. She had been subjected to magical manipulation so intense that her memory had never been the same. This was often attributed to a powerful memory charm gone awry. But there are those who whisper that Voldemort, whose skill in manipulation surpassed even Dumbledore's, had found a way to transfigure the memory itself, twist it, reshape it, turn it into something that served him alone. And then there is the case of Barty Crouch Jr., who lived in disguise under the Imperious Curse for months, perhaps years, believing himself at times to be someone else. Memory charms were involved, yes, but they could not sustain such a transformation alone. The continuous reality that Barty experienced, his thoughts, his convictions, his understanding of himself, suggests something deeper than simple deception. Perhaps someone had reshaped his internal reality, altered the furniture of his mind through some form of cognitive transfiguration. The implications stretch even further when we examine magical portraiture. A headmaster's painting speaks, advises, recalls. Dumbledore's portrait offered counsel to Harry after death. If a person's essence can be captured in pigment and canvas, and that essence includes memory, then memory itself is clearly transferable. And if transferable, why not transfigurable? Could a painted Dumbledore remember something the real one never knew? Could the memory be implanted into a portrait and reshaped for future generations? Hermione Granger's use of Obliviate on her own parents is among the most haunting uses of memory magic. She didn't just erase their knowledge of her, she gave them false memories, an entire alternative life in Australia. What if, instead of implanting false memories with charm work, she could have transfigured the existing ones? Could she have transformed recollections of her childhood into memories of sunlit beaches and a daughter who never existed? Would the parents feel the difference? The pensieve itself is a riddle. Dumbledore used it to extract excess thoughts and to study them more calmly. But when a memory is placed into a pensieve, it exists as light, as matter, as movement. Could it be possible that within the pensieve one might shape a memory as one might sculpt water into forms? Could one reach into the pool and mold a moment from fear into love, from betrayal into loyalty? Dark magic often works by breaking boundaries. Horcruxes fracture the soul. Inferi reanimate the dead. What if the dark variant of Transfiguration is one that rewrites the past, not in reality but in the mind? Imagine a cult of wizards who transform painful memories into bliss, who erase guilt from murderers or instill obedience by transforming trauma into reverence. It would be a crime unseen, unprovable, and irreversible. The founders of Hogwarts likely knew this risk. The sorting hat contains memories from all 4 founders and seems to possess independent thought. If memory can give rise to personality within enchanted objects, it implies that the structure of memory is a key to identity. Alter the memory and you alter the self. Perhaps that is why memory manipulation remains poorly taught and closely guarded, not because it is weak, but because it is too strong. Tom Riddle manipulated Ginny Weasley through a diary that retained his 16-year-old memory. This fragment of soul fed on Ginny's thoughts, pulling her into darkness. But what if that diary also transfigured her memories? What if it turned friendly moments into feelings of fear, or happy days at school into isolation and despair? She became another person, not because of possession, but because her memories betrayed her. Even Luna Lovegood, with her dreamy demeanour and strange insight, once spoke of rack spurts, invisible creatures that float through ears and make one's brain fuzzy. While whimsical, the metaphor hints at something deeper, the vulnerability of thought. If invisible creatures can distort clarity, how much more invasive could a wizard be who uses transfiguration not on objects but on memories? When Harry viewed Snape's memories in Deathly Hallows, he experienced them as real, unfiltered, vivid, but the truth is he trusted them because of their clarity. He never questioned whether they had been changed. But what if Snape had transfigured the memory of Lily's kindness? What if he reshaped his own cruelty into restraint? We remember the boy by the lake, but what if that moment was not as it truly happened? What if the magic lay not in the memory, but in the way it was transformed before it ever reached the pensieve? There are no known spells for memory transfiguration, but perhaps that is intentional. Perhaps such magic is not taught, not named, because naming it would make it real. The same way the unforgivable curses are known and feared, this would be the unseeable curse, the one that reshapes who we are without leaving a scar. Not death, not pain, but the reshaping of the soul's mirror. And so we return to the dungeons of Hogwarts, where a memory glows in silver mist. The surface shimmers and the truth it holds is trusted. But in the shadows beyond the torchlight one must wonder, not what is remembered, but who has shaped it. Not what is true, but what has been transfigured to seem true. In a world where magic touches everything, perhaps nothing is sacred, not even the mind. Number 21. Can transfiguration break the laws of time? In the dusty corner of the room of requirement, where forgotten objects shimmer with layers of spell residue and time-worn enchantments, lies an odd galleon, gleaming unnaturally amidst decay. It's not just the shine that disturbs the air around it, but the uncomfortable question it presents to any witch or wizard who's ever studied transfiguration. This single coin, allegedly transformed by a young Ravenclaw in the 1920s, had once been a corroded scrap found in Knockturn Alley. After a complex sequence of incantations, it emerged gleaming and fresh, its minting date visibly changed. What, then, had truly occurred? Was the past rewritten for this object, or had magic merely dressed up a corpse in gold? Professor McGonagall, the finest Transfiguration expert Hogwarts had seen since Dumbledore himself, had warned students often and firmly, Transfiguration is not creation, it is a reconfiguration of what exists, not a return to what was. Yet the question nags: if an object is made to appear new, to behave as if new, and to fool every magical and non-magical test into believing it is new, has it not, in some essential way, travelled backward in time? Consider the transfiguration of broken stone into a complete bridge, a task once performed during the wizarding evacuation of Godric's Hollow in 1997. A battalion of witches, fearing pursuit by snatchers, transfigured the remains of a collapsed Roman arch into a fully formed viaduct, sturdy enough to carry dozens across the ravine. The structure gleamed white under moonlight, and for a moment it seemed time itself had been reversed. But within days the arch cracked again, precisely at the seams of the ancient breaks. Rain seeped into the enchantment. The structure failed. What had returned was not a bridge born anew, but a memory of what once had been, wrapped in illusion. Hermione Granger, ever the logical mind, once noted while studying under Professor McGonagall, Transfiguration doesn't rewrite history, it masks it. The transformed bridge was strong, but only temporarily. The spell did not erase centuries of erosion, it suppressed them, painting a fresh illusion over structural fatigue, until nature reclaimed her hold. And so the question grows more discomforting. If transfiguration can only suppress the truth, is it a form of temporal deceit? An even more troubling example came during the restoration of Grimmauld Place. When Creature, loyal but aged, attempted to reverse decades of decay with transfiguration, he managed to make a shattered table whole again. Yet weeks later, the legs buckled under the weight of mere books. The illusion had worn thin. It was as though the spell had not transformed the table, but only fooled it into forgetting its own damage. Memory in magical objects, as Dumbledore once hinted to Harry, lingers longer than one might suspect. Even inanimate things carry impressions, he'd said, gesturing toward the pensive. What they remember, they sometimes resist letting go. But this brings us to a disturbing realization. If transfiguration only alters the physical form while suppressing underlying magical memory, then every act of such transformation is a lie told to reality. One can turn a dead rose into a fresh bloom, but the petals may still remember decay. They may rot faster than expected. They may crumble beneath the illusion of youth. Time in magical terms is not just a measure, but a residue. It leaves traces, it lingers in grain, in bone, in stone. In 1983, a scandal broke within the Department of Magical Transportation. An aura had transfigured a ruined broomstick into a Nimbus 1700 to flee a band of dark wizards in Albania. Though it soared flawlessly at first, halfway across the Black Sea, the broom reverted mid-flight to its original, broken form. The aura plummeted and was only saved by emergency apparition. In the aftermath, the department issued a ruling. Transfiguration should not be used as a substitute for time magic. It may mask damage but not erase the temporal consequences of deterioration. This ruling aligned with what some called the law of magical inertia, the notion that magical objects retain their temporal identity no matter how dramatically they are altered in form. Luna Lovegood once theorized in The Quibbler that every object has a memory echo that resists deception. She pointed to a study where transfigured apples, though made to look fresh, spoiled at the rate of their original age. Their time could not be unspoiled, only dressed in denial. The issue becomes even murkier when sentient magical beings are involved. There is a well-documented case in the 18th century where a witch, desperate to save her aging crup, used advanced transfiguration to return it to puppyhood. The creature wagged its tail with all the enthusiasm of youth, but its eyes, tired and filled with confusion, betrayed something wrong. Within days, the crup began displaying signs of age once more. It remembered its own time, even if its body did not. And when it died, the ministry ruled that transfiguration had constituted magical cruelty. There is also the story of an enchanted violin housed in the archives of the Department of Mysteries. Once broken during the Blitz in 1941, it was transfigured back into working order for study, but when played, the sound wavered, thin, uncertain, echoing with something like pain. An unspeakable later confessed in an interview, it was as if the wood remembered the fire, the music choked on the past, the violin was returned to its damaged state, better broken than haunted. And what of temporal identity in artifacts of greater complexity? In the case of Godric Gryffindor's sword, its magic lies in what it absorbs, its timeline of triumphs. Had someone transfigured the sword to remove its bloodstains or battle marks, would it remain the same object of power? Dumbledore would have disagreed. As he told Harry, the sword of Gryffindor only takes in that which makes it stronger. Erasing its marks would be erasing history, and with it, the enchantment. Some in the Department of Magical Law Enforcement have begun to speculate that transfiguration, unchecked, could be a criminal act, not of theft or assault, but of time tampering. When a wizard transfigures a tattered robe into one of regal silk, does it become a genuine relic of nobility or merely a glamour? If a cursed relic is turned into a teacup, has the curse vanished or merely been concealed beneath porcelain skin? In 2006, a magical crime syndicate in Zurich used transfiguration to launder stolen relics. Broken goblets were restored into pristine antiques and sold to unsuspecting collectors. But when one shattered at the stroke of midnight during a solstice ceremony, the enchantments inside burst forth, curses that should have died with time, revived by illusion. The damage was extensive. The incident was later termed a temporal misconduct event. Even magical education is not immune. In the early 1990s, several students at Durmstrang transfigured their old exam parchments into blank ones to avoid detection during a cheating scheme. Yet when the transfiguration wore off, the original answers returned in ghostly script, overlapping new words. The spell had not erased history, it had layered it poorly, and time had peeled back the lie. It becomes clear then that transfiguration exists in delicate tension with the magical structure of time. It does not travel time, it does not erase time, it merely bullies time into silence, temporarily, like a silencing charm over a screaming truth. It cannot last forever. The world remembers. Albus Dumbledore, who once turned his own bed into a narrow camp cot during wartime to make space for the injured, remarked later that transfiguration is compassion when done right, and cruelty when done carelessly. He never sought to undo time, he worked with it, respecting its scars. That cot, for all its tight discomfort, bore the mark of sacrifice, not denial. There is beauty in old things, in scars that speak of survival. When we transfigure, we must ask, are we healing or pretending? Is the newness we create authentic, or is it theft from time's honest ledger? This is not a question answered in a classroom, nor in spellbooks, nor even in the archives of the Department of Mysteries. It is answered in the quiet collapse of transfigured bridges, in the rebroken tables of haunted kitchens, in the sound of a violin that cannot forget its fire. There may come a day when a spell is strong enough to truly reverse time for an object. But until then, we must live with the knowledge that transfiguration is a story told to reality, and time eventually tells its own. Number 22. What happens if you transfigure a person into another person? In the quiet corridors of Hogwarts, where knowledge and danger often dance hand in hand, there is a classroom unlike any other. Sunlight slants across rows of polished desks, casting golden light on blackboard formulas that speak of impossible things. It is here, under the stern gaze of Professor McGonagall, that students are introduced to Transfiguration, the most precise, the most dangerous, and perhaps the most ethically complex branch of magic. They learn to turn matchsticks into needles, beetles into buttons. But there's a question no textbook dares to answer, one that lingers like forbidden magic in the air. What if you could transform a person into another person? The theory seems deceptively simple. If a desk can become a pig and back again, why not make Harry Potter look like Ron Weasley through Transfiguration rather than Polyjuice Potion? After all, both boys are made of flesh and bone. Both are wizards. Both walk the same halls. If Transfiguration can rework the essence of an object to the point where it croaks instead of creaks, then why not rearrange one human body into the exact likeness of another? Yet the magic that changes shape is not merely cosmetic. When Hermione transformed her own teeth with a spell in Goblet of Fire, the results were real and lasting. She had to go to the hospital wing to shrink them back to normal, Ron had said later. If bodily modifications are permanent, then the implications of changing someone into another person entirely are disturbing. The act would reach into the bones, the muscles, the very identity. But is identity so malleable? Take Harry as an example. Suppose he was subjected to advanced human-to-human transfiguration and restructured to match Ron's physical form. Would his lightning scar vanish under freckled skin? Would his voice drop half a register, carrying the familiar drawl of the youngest Weasley son? Would the Marauder's map mistake him for Ron, or would it whisper the truth that behind the red hair and blue eyes is still Harry James Potter? The Marauder's map is a curious object in this discussion. Created by four of the most brilliant troublemakers Hogwarts had ever seen, it identifies not just a person's location, but their very name, their essence. In Prisoner of Azkaban, the map reveals Peter Pettigrew's presence even while he is disguised as Scabbers the Rat. This detail is critical. If the map still recognized Pettigrew despite a complete transformation of form and behavior, then it must track something deeper than flesh. Perhaps soul or magical signature. Would it still label a transformed Harry as Harry, even if he bore Ron's face? The question grows darker still when one considers magical abilities. Ron and Harry differ in magical talent, not dramatically but enough. Ron is better at chess and strategy. Harry excels in defense against the dark arts. If Harry's body became Ron's, would his strengths shift as well? Or is magical ability a function of the soul, something immutable, untouched by physical change? The books suggest this is the case. When Barty Crouch Jr. impersonated Mad-Eye Moody using Polyjuice Potion in Goblet of Fire, he retained his own magical skill, not Moody's. His dueling technique, his knowledge of the dark arts, all remained uniquely his. But Transfiguration is not Polyjuice Potion. It's not a disguise. It is change, total and terrifying. Still, Professor McGonagall, who can transform herself into a cat and back again, never once suggests that such deep transfiguration of human identity should be attempted. In Order of the Phoenix, when Dolores Umbridge seeks to take over Hogwarts, McGonagall warns Harry. Transfiguration is some of the most complex and dangerous magic you will learn at Hogwarts. Anyone messing around in my class will leave and not come back. Her tone is final, chilling, and laden with the weight of unspoken dangers. What are those dangers? Let us imagine an extreme case. Suppose a Death Eater used this form of transfiguration to replace a key ministry official, say Kingsley Shacklebolt. An enemy could attend meetings, issue orders, perhaps even influence laws, all while the real Shacklebolt lies unconscious or dead, never suspected. The implications are horrifying. Polyjuice is detectable. Transfiguration, if perfected to this degree, might not be. There is also the question of permanence. Can a person remain in a transfigured state indefinitely? In Goblet of Fire, when Draco Malfoy is turned into a ferret by Professor Moody, or rather Crouch Jr., McGonagall is outraged. "We never use transfiguration as a punishment," she exclaims. The implication is that the transformation, even of form, is a violation, a form of magical abuse. But Draco was returned to normal quickly. What if someone were not? The magical community has rigid laws around human transfiguration, though they are rarely discussed in public forums. This silence speaks volumes. If such transformations are forbidden, it is likely not for technical reasons, but ethical ones. Changing a person into a chair may be acceptable in theory, but into another living human being, that crosses into territory few dare explore. It dismantles the barrier between illusion and reality, between self and other. Consider a thought experiment involving Hermione Granger. She is, perhaps, the most gifted student of her year, especially in Transfiguration. Suppose she were to attempt turning herself into Luna Lovegood. She could replicate the blonde hair, the dreamy stare, even Luna's peculiar gait. But could she mimic her soul? Luna sees the world through a lens no one else does. Her magic is gentle, eccentric, unknowable. Could Hermione reproduce that magic, or would her spellwork still bear the precision and logic she's known for? Magic, as Dumbledore often reminds us, is not just in the wand, it is in the wizard. The wand chooses the wizard, after all, and reacts to their unique nature. If Harry in Ron's body picked up Ron's wand, would it work, or would it reject him? In Deathly Hallows, when Harry uses Draco's wand, it behaves sluggishly, uncertainly. The bond between wand and wizard cannot be faked, no, not by potions, not by mimicry, not by force. What then does that say about the limits of transfiguration? There are deeper, more disturbing questions about consent and autonomy. If a wizard is transformed into someone else against their will, what protections do they have? If transfiguration can alter a person's voice, their fingerprints, their body, their face, then how do we protect truth itself? Could someone use this magic to forge a confession, impersonate a witness, steal a family inheritance? Could a criminal live in hiding as another person, never to be found again? It is not far-fetched. The wizarding world has struggled with identity and secrecy before. In Order of the Phoenix, members of the Order must use passwords and Patronus verification to avoid infiltration. The fear of deception is real. But what if that deception were absolute, not just an act, but a transformation? It would be remiss not to recall the case of Rita Skeeter. An unregistered animagus, she used her beetle form to gather secrets and exploit people. She was not even fully transformed, merely hidden in plain sight. And yet the damage she inflicted was profound. If someone with darker intentions were able to become another person entirely, the consequences would multiply tenfold. The danger, then, is not only in what is possible, but in what is permissible. Hogwarts teaches students to be wary of such magic, not because it cannot be done, but because it should not be. Just as Horcruxes tempt the power-hungry with the promise of immortality, person-to-person transfiguration might tempt the desperate with the illusion of rebirth, revenge, or erasure. Even in the darkest times, Dumbledore resisted such manipulation. He believed in identity, in the sanctity of self. "It is our choices, Harry, that show what we truly are, far more than our abilities," he said. This notion would collapse entirely if people could become other people. Choice vanishes if identity is fluid. Accountability dissolves, justice falters. And yet, there are moments in the series when transformation touches the heart, not just the body. Tonks, a metamorphmagus, alters her appearance at will, yet remains utterly herself. Her pink hair is not just a feature. It is a signature of who she is. It is not transformation that threatens identity, but imitation. Tonks changes to express, but to become another person through transfiguration would be to suppress, to overwrite, to deceive. The final, cruelest irony is this: in a world so bound by magical law, The real danger might not be the spell itself, but the silence around it. If Transfiguration can accomplish such a feat, who has done it already? Who walks the halls of the ministry wearing a face that is not their own? Who among us is real, and who is artifice? Perhaps this is why Professor McGonagall guards her classroom like a sanctum. Her cold eyes, her rigid rules, her unyielding standards, they are not just for safety, they are for truth. In a world where the impossible is real, she remains a gatekeeper between knowledge and its misuse. To study Transfiguration under her is to stand on the edge of a moral precipice, staring down into the abyss of what magic can do if we forget who we are. And so the question remains unanswered, tucked between the lines of textbooks and the cautious silence of professors. What happens if you transfigure one person into another? The answer, it seems, is not just about bones and skin, but about soul, power, and peril. It is a spell that may never be cast, not because it cannot be done, but because once it is, the world may never recover. Number 23. Can Transfiguration influence destiny? Of all magical disciplines taught at Hogwarts, none is as eerily powerful and quietly unsettling as Transfiguration. It is the art of changing the form or appearance of an object, animal or person, but beneath its mechanical explanation lies something that brushes against the fabric of destiny itself. If a person is turned into an inanimate object for a decade, do they remain the same individual, or does that decade in silence, in immobility, erase something vital? The magical world has long danced around these questions. In truth, few dare to explore the full implications, but stories, real stories, linger in the shadows like a forgotten page in a spellbook too dangerous to be read aloud. During the 19th century, a witch named Elspeth Morwenna disappeared during a transfiguration experiment gone wrong. According to the archives stored at the Department of Magical Accidents and Catastrophes, Elspeth attempted to transfigure herself into a raven to spy on her estranged husband, who was suspected of consorting with dark creatures. She succeeded, but she failed to properly set the duration. For 13 years she lived as a raven, her mind eroding, her memories twisting into instinct, her human soul growing feeble. By the time a young Aura reversed the spell, she was unrecognizable, not physically, but spiritually. She no longer remembered her name, and her speech, once sharp and poetic, had been reduced to broken phrases. Her destiny, to become head of the Department of International Magical Cooperation, was irrevocably shattered. She spent her final years in the Janus Thicky ward, often perching on the windowsill, cawing softly at the sky. This is not just a cautionary tale about the risks of advanced magic. This is an instance of fate rewritten. If Elspeth had died in an accident, it would have been fate. But this was a detour imposed by magic itself. She had not been meant to vanish into feathers and bone, and yet she did. Her entire thread in the great tapestry of wizarding society was not merely severed, it was rewoven. This forces an uncomfortable question. If magic can alter the sequence of someone's life, can it also alter fate itself? And if so, what does it mean for all those who believe in prophecy? The question grows even more disturbing when one recalls that Transfiguration is taught to Hogwarts students from their first year. Transfiguration is some of the most complex and dangerous magic you will learn at Hogwarts. Professor McGonagall tells her class in Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone, but nowhere does the curriculum warn of existential transformation, of the way a misshapen spell can not only disfigure the body, but distort a life's arc. The students transform matchsticks into needles, beetles into buttons, but what they are not told is that a misstep could send a person down a path so alien that even time-turners could not repair it. In Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire, Barty Crouch Jr. uses Polyjuice Potion, not Transfiguration, to assume the identity of Mad Eye Moody. But it's worth remembering that his deception altered the lives of many. Harry was entered into the Triwizard Tournament, Cedric Diggory was killed, and Voldemort returned. Had Crouch Jr. used Transfiguration instead, would the result have been different? Not in outcome, but in essence. Transfiguration implies permanence unless reversed. Polyjuice is temporary. The implication is subtle but haunting. Transfiguration, in its deepest form, can shape more than flesh. It can shape futures. Another tale often whispered but rarely printed is that of Dorcas Meadows. She was a member of the original Order of the Phoenix, described by Albus Dumbledore as one of the bravest witches and truest friends I ever had. Her death is only briefly mentioned in Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix, killed personally by Voldemort. But what is often omitted is the story that a year before her death she was captured by Death Eaters and transfigured into a statue of obsidian. For 3 months she remained trapped, aware but unable to speak or move, displayed as a trophy in a Malfoy estate. Her escape was miraculous, but those who saw her afterwards said her spirit had dulled, as though her courage had been put on pause and never fully returned. She died fighting, yes, but perhaps she was never truly unshackled from the magic that froze her. Her fate, prophesied or not, had been touched, delayed, and bent. In Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince, we see Dumbledore's injured hand, the result of wearing Marvolo Gaunt's cursed ring. The curse was slowed by powerful magic, possibly transfiguration mixed with charm work. But the idea remains, even the greatest wizard alive could not fully stop the momentum of fate. He could only delay it. What if transfiguration is precisely that, a tool to delay, disrupt, or distort? Magic, in this sense, becomes more than just an instrument. It becomes a philosophical paradox. If fate can be redirected, then prophecy loses meaning. And yet, if magic follows rules that are known and repeatable, then perhaps destiny is not a fixed path, but a garden of forking branches, each spell casting a shadow into one of many possible futures. The Department of Mysteries is home to many enigmas, the Veil, the Hall of Prophecy, the Time Room. But few know that it also contains what unspeakables call the Formless Vault. There, in an enchanted chamber, lie objects, once human, people transformed and never returned, victims of dark transfiguration or failed spells too tangled to reverse. They are not dead, but not alive in any way we understand. These poor souls challenge not only ethics, but metaphysics. If a child was transformed into a hat at age 6 and remains so for 50 years, what is their fate? Have they been denied their destiny, or has magic simply revealed how fragile the idea of destiny truly is? The magical world relies heavily on prophecy. Trelawney's prediction about the child born as the 7th month dies was the pivot on which Voldemort's downfall balanced. And yet, what if Lily had transfigured baby Harry into a clock, placed him in the attic, and gone into hiding? Would prophecy still find him, or would it shatter against the walls of magical interference? The question is not trivial. It asks whether destiny is a straight line or a spider's web, and whether spells like transfiguration are the scissors that can cut through its threads. Even within Hogwarts, transfiguration holds an eerie prestige. Professor McGonagall, a master of the art, is strict and reverent, as though she fears the very spells she teaches. She never jokes during lessons, never plays with form for amusement. Her Animagus transformation is sharp, precise, controlled. There is no room for accident. Contrast this with Gilderoy Lockhart's disastrous attempt to mend bones, or Hagrid's wild experiments. Transfiguration, unlike charms or even potions, brooks no chaos. Why? Because perhaps at its core it is not about magic. It is about rewriting the self, and the self, once rewritten, might not remember the original script. One can think of Peter Pettigrew. He became a rat for years, hiding in the Weasley home as Scabbers. This Animagus transformation was intentional, yes, but its consequence was far greater than cowardice. He missed a decade of human interaction. His body adjusted to a different rhythm. His mind began to think like a rodent. By the time he returned to Voldemort, he was less man than vermin. Was that merely survival, or did the spell alter his essence in pushing him closer to the betrayal he would later commit? Did Transfiguration merely change his shape, or did it also give fate a nudge? Even the tale of Bertha Jorkins, though not about Transfiguration, illustrates how memory charms can distort fate. But imagine if instead of forgetting, she had been transformed, hidden as a tree or a frog. How long would her destiny remain suspended in time? Could she still fulfill a purpose written in the stars? Or would her new form nullify it? These are not academic questions. They touch on the very core of magical ethics. And yet, they are rarely discussed, perhaps because the answers are too dangerous. In Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them, we meet creatures that were once believed to be cursed humans, like the werewolf or the Animagus gone rogue. If magical creatures can begin as wizards and witches, twisted by transformation, then the line between man and beast is perilously thin. Transfiguration is not just a class, it is the knife edge upon which identity balances. Change the form and the function, the future, even the soul might follow. There is a quiet horror in the idea that someone could be turned into a chair and forgotten, that their soul might wait inside, listening to centuries pass. Some unspeakables believe that magical form does not trap the mind entirely, that the essence of a person remains dormant, waiting to be reawakened. But what if the form reshapes the soul? What if time, transfigured, is no longer linear for the cursed? One of the more obscure cases in wizarding lore is that of Roderick Flint, a 17th century dark wizard who transfigured all members of a rival family into coins. He spent them across Britain, dooming them to be lost in circulation forever. The Wizengamot later passed the Flint Clause, forbidding permanent transfiguration of sentient beings, but not before Roderick's victims became footnotes in an economic system they once ruled. Their fates became currency, their identities erased, their destinies liquidated. Even magical portraits raise questions. Are they transfigurations of soul? They think, feel, advise. Dumbledore's portrait gives counsel even after death. But if transfiguration can animate a painting with memories and personality, is that not the ultimate tampering with fate? A loop of self extended beyond the grave, mocking mortality. And then there is the ultimate terror, involuntary transformation. In duels, during war, or through punishment, transfiguration has been used to silence enemies, trap foes, and immobilize dissenters. If a rebel is turned into stone and hidden in the mountains, is their mission lost or simply delayed? Is their destiny still ticking in some suspended chamber of existence? The very act of changing form challenges what it means to be. If a person can be made into glass, then shattered, where does the soul go? Do spells of reversal repair more than the surface? Or does every transfiguration leave a scar on the timeline of a life? And yet there are no known prophecies warning of transfiguration. No warnings that he who becomes wood shall not walk again. This silence is perhaps the most chilling sign of all. For if fate cannot anticipate transfiguration, then perhaps it is not fate at all, but merely a guest dressed in robes. Perhaps this is why Dumbledore, in his old age, grew wary of certain spells. Why McGonagall never sought glory in innovation. Why the Ministry keeps a list, never confirmed, always denied, of forbidden transformations. The fear is not of failure. It is of success. Of bending a life so far that it breaks, of touching the marrow of destiny and not knowing what will shatter. In the end, transfiguration is not merely a spell, it is a question, not just of what can be changed, but of what should, not only of shape, but of soul. And whether, in casting it, we become the gods of our own mythology, or the monsters in someone else's. Number 24. What happens to the reproductive function of transfigured creatures? Of all the mysterious branches of magic taught at Hogwarts, Transfiguration remains the most deceptively straightforward and yet philosophically perplexing. On the surface, it appears to be a discipline of shapes, boundaries, and external traits. Turn a teacup into a tortoise and it walks. Change a rat into a goblet and it holds wine. But beyond this elegance lies a question that few wizards dare to ask. What becomes of the inner essence of a transfigured creature? Not its mind or soul, but something more tangible and concrete, its ability to reproduce. The question is discomforting in its implications. What happens if two animals are transfigured into another species and left to breed? Will their offspring be real, or will the illusion shatter the moment nature knocks on the door? In Professor McGonagall's third-year lesson, she famously reminded her students that Transfiguration is some of the most complex and dangerous magic you will learn at Hogwarts. Anyone messing around in my class will leave and not come back. That danger isn't just about accidental decapitations or the horrifying intermediate forms of miscast spells. It includes the deeper, seldom mentioned risks, creating living contradictions. Suppose a wizard transfigures two cats into rabbits, and these transformed rabbits then engage in the natural behaviors of their new form. If they mate and produce kits, what are those creatures? Are they rabbits, cats, or something neither? Echoes held together by magic? Consider the case of Herbert Clagmore, a little-known magical theorist who lived in Yorkshire during the late 1800s. Clagmore had a penchant for testing the limits of magical biology. He transfigured a pair of ferrets into hedgehogs and allowed them to live that way for a year. He documented how they adapted to hedgehog diets, behavior, and hibernation. When mating season arrived, Clagmore observed them engage in reproductive behavior, but no offspring ever came. For months, he monitored the female, expecting signs of pregnancy. None appeared. Eventually, when the spell was reversed, both animals appeared healthy, but their experience left behind a troubling question. Clagmore wrote in his journal, "They lived as hedgehogs, behaved as hedgehogs, and yet could not create new life." What is this but proof that magic can imitate all but the deepest truth? This raises a staggering contradiction. If reproduction fails in transfigured forms, then the magic is surface level, an illusion more sophisticated than a glamour, but still a deception. However, if offspring do appear, then the transformation must go deeper, into genetic code, organs, hormonal balances, and DNA. But herein lies another issue. Wizards do not study DNA. The concept is foreign to them. Their understanding of biology is intuitive, practical, but not molecular. So if Transfiguration truly changes a cat into a rabbit at the reproductive level, the spell is not simply molding shape. It is rewriting the foundation of life itself without the caster knowing it. Fred and George Weasley once used Transfiguration during a prank in their fourth year to turn a school broom into a peacock that strutted across the Great Hall during dinner. The bird pecked at food, flapped its wings, and strutted convincingly. But no one ever asked whether it could lay an egg. This, perhaps, is why most magical guidelines strictly forbid long-term transfiguration on living beings. Even Professor McGonagall, a master animagus, remained wary of its misuse. When she transformed into a cat, she retained her mind, her human understanding, her identity, a form without full conversion. But if she had mated with a real cat in that form, what would have happened? The Ministry of Magic keeps no public records of transfigured offspring, which suggests either the results are inconsistent, dangerous, or politically unpalatable. Magical law is often slow to adapt to philosophical questions, and reproduction, through magical forms, touches too closely to the questions of identity, consent, and the boundaries of life. If one were to transfigure a human into another species, or vice versa, could that being reproduce? And if yes, would the offspring be viable, magical, or monstrous? In one of the darker corners of magical history lies a tale whispered about Edwinus Crane, a reclusive wizard from the early 20th century who sought to create a new breed of magical beast through controlled transfiguration. He transfigured a pair of moles into badgers and encouraged them to mate. According to rumors in the archives of the Department for the Regulation and Control of Magical Creatures, Crane claimed success. His badgers produced young that were oddly compliant, unusually intelligent, and terrifyingly magical. Skeptics accused him of fabrication, but the story lingers for a reason. It suggests either an extreme case of magical inheritance or an unrecognized breach in the fabric of magical law. The case of Animagi provides a slightly different angle. James Potter, Sirius Black, and Peter Pettigrew each learned to transform into an animal, a stag, a dog, and a rat, respectively. Their forms were consistent, repeatable, and accurate. Yet during all their years at Hogwarts, there is no record of them remaining in that form for days or attempting to live as those animals fully. It is unknown whether a transformed human could experience animal instincts so deeply that reproduction would even occur. But if such a thing did happen, what would the offspring inherit? The magic or the biology? In Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them, Newt Scamander categorizes magical creatures not only by danger, but by the mystery of their origins. Some hybrids, such as the blast-ended scroot, were the result of questionable breeding practices. Could it be that magical breeding includes transfiguration? If someone transformed a manticore into a hippogriff and crossbred it with a genuine hippogriff, the potential results defy all moral and biological codes. Yet nothing in the magical world guarantees this cannot occur. The silence may be deliberate. The deeper question lies not in what transfiguration can do, but what it should be allowed to do. If the spell fundamentally alters a creature's reproductive system, it could be used to manipulate entire populations. Imagine transforming dozens of frogs into fish and placing them in a lake. If they reproduce, their offspring might pass as fish for generations, altering ecosystems. If they cannot, then transfiguration becomes a tool of sterilization, unintentional perhaps, but no less devastating. Gamp's law of elemental transfiguration has its own set of limits. One of its principal exceptions is food. True food cannot be created from nothing. It can only be duplicated or altered. If that principle applies to living essence, then perhaps reproduction is similarly untouchable. The soul of a creature, its generative magic, might be something that transfiguration cannot replicate. In that sense, transfiguration may dress the body but never touch the core that gives rise to life. Then again, magical theory remains suspiciously vague on what constitutes identity. A polyjuice potion allows someone to become another person, complete with vocal cords, fingerprints, and bodily functions. But never once is it mentioned whether the polyjuiced person could conceive a child in that form. The books never say, and that silence, again, is revealing. In Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire, Barty Crouch Jr. impersonates Mad-Eye Moody for nearly a year using polyjuice potion. He eats, sleeps, teaches, and acts convincingly. If he had chosen to enter into a romantic relationship, or even father a child, what would have emerged from that deception? A child with Barty's genetics? Or Alastair Moody's? Or none at all? Polyjuice and transfiguration differ, but they share a key magical feature, the assumption of form, and still we lack a single canonical instance of biological continuity through magical disguise. One might argue that the case of werewolves complicates things. Remus Lupin, as a werewolf, retained his human mind only with wolfsbane potion. He could sire a child, Teddy Lupin, but his condition was lycanthropy, not transfiguration. The curse lived in the blood, not the shape. So this suggests that magical effects on biology can be hereditary, but only when they originate from innate magical traits or curses, not cosmetic transformations. Wizards have long used transfiguration to mask inconvenient truths. House elves transformed into furniture, objects turned into animals for experiments. But when it comes to reproduction, the ministry draws a quiet line. Cross-species breeding through magical means is explicitly forbidden in Clause 73 of the Guidelines for Experimental Breeding. It's not because the results are morally wrong. Morality in magic is often murky, but because the results are uncontrollable. The potential for abuse is immense. Suppose a dark wizard transfigures himself into a magical creature to evade capture, mates with a real creature of that species, and later dies. His legacy could live on in half-magical, half-fabricated offspring that resist classification and regulation. It is no accident that most dark magical experiments begin with the manipulation of form. From Grindelwald to Voldemort, every great dark wizard sought to redefine the boundaries of life and death, and reproduction is the hinge upon which both hang. There is also a deeper ethical problem. If a transfigured animal conceives, who is responsible for the child? If a person is transfigured into an animal and impregnated, is it rape? Is it consent? The questions spiral into philosophical chaos. Magical law is not equipped to handle them, nor is Hogwarts, where students regularly transform creatures for homework, never wondering whether they leave behind confused, altered, or sterilized beings in their wake. Perhaps the most unsettling thought is that the magic itself doesn't know. Spells follow intent and pattern, not wisdom. A poorly cast transfiguration may create a living creature that looks and acts like another, but whose biology is fractured, whose inner clock is stilled. That creature may suffer, unable to reproduce, unable to die, caught in magical stasis. And the wizard who cast the spell may never know. The deeper we look into the core of transfiguration, the more we find that it mimics divine power, the power to redefine what something is. But magic, unlike nature, is often blind to consequences. A transfigured being may live for years unaware of its borrowed form until the moment comes to create new life, and nothing happens. And in that silence, the truth of its existence is laid bare. It was never whole, only masked. And yet we must ask, why has no one tried to answer this? Perhaps they have. Perhaps the Department of Mysteries hides such experiments in its endless corridors. Perhaps that is what lies behind the closed doors in the Hall of Prophecy, or in the archives of the Department of Magical Creatures. And maybe, just maybe, the answer is too horrifying to reveal, because to admit that transfiguration can reach into the depths of life is to admit that wizards wield the power not just to create illusions, but to play God. Number 25. Can you transfigure memories into physical objects? In the quiet corridors of the Department of Mysteries, where reality and thought intertwine, memories are treated not as fleeting impressions but as tangible currents of magic. We know that a wizard can draw a silvery strand of memory from their mind, store it in a vial, and later pour it into a pensieve to witness the event unfold again with uncanny clarity. This process, demonstrated by Albus Dumbledore multiple times, is both intimate and dangerous. It offers a way to relive one's past, or another's, as an observer, not just a dreamer. But if memory is malleable enough to be extracted and viewed, can it also be transfigured? Can it become not a misty thread but a solid object? A ring, a book, a sculpture, infused with the past it holds? This question rests on the edge of established magical theory and speculative transfiguration. The Transfiguration branch of magic, as Professor McGonagall often reminded her students, is deeply rooted in precision. Transfiguration is some of the most complex and dangerous magic you will learn at Hogwarts. Anyone messing around in my class will leave and not come back. You have been warned. The act of transforming one object into another requires perfect control. But what if the object is a thought? A memory? Memories, once removed from the mind, behave like substance, a silvery, cloud-like thread glowing faintly. So why shouldn't they be shaped, reformed, and given a different material nature. Let us consider an example that stretches the boundaries of this concept. Suppose a wizard, obsessed with preserving the love of his life, wishes not only to relive his time with her, but to immortalize it into something wearable. He extracts a memory, perhaps their first kiss under a blooming hawthorn tree, and seeks to transfigure it into a ring. Not a mere symbolic item, but one that literally contains the memory, pulses with its magic, and perhaps even lets its wearer feel the warmth, smell the blossoms, and hear the breathless silence between two hearts. Would this be a ring or a vessel of the soul? There is evidence that magical emotion and thought can affect objects. Consider Horcruxes, fragments of soul embedded in items. While dark and twisted, the idea proves that intangible parts of a person can inhabit physical matter. Voldemort made Horcruxes of a diary, a ring, a locket, and even Nagini. Each of these items wasn't just a storage device. It reacted, influenced, corrupted. Memory, while not as potent as a soul, still carries the wizard's essence, the echo of their perspective, feeling, and experience. It is not a leap to imagine a memory fused into a locket might whisper its story to the holder, reanimating moments long past. There is also the case of Tom Riddle's diary, which brings this speculative concept closer to possibility. The diary didn't just contain words, it contained memory, conscious, manipulative, dangerous. Riddle's 16-year-old self emerged from it not as a ghost, but as an intelligent echo. I preserved my 16-year-old self in a diary so that one day, with luck, I would be able to lead another to finish Salazar Slytherin's noble work. His preserved self was more than ink. It was an immersive memory, capable of feeding, growing, and manifesting in the real world. If that memory, enhanced by dark magic, could become semi-sentient through an object, perhaps it is not so outlandish to imagine a memory transformed into something less sinister, a pendant that allows you to live another's happiest moment. But would such a transfiguration be legal, ethical, or safe? Memories are fragile. The slightest shift in perception, the smallest doubt, can distort them. When Dumbledore showed Harry Slughorn's memory of the conversation about Horcruxes, the recollection was altered, tampered with. "This memory has been tampered with," Dumbledore told Harry, pointing to the obvious, unnatural jump in the vision. "Slughorn has attempted to obscure the truth. If memories can be corrupted so easily in the pensieve, how much more danger would there be if they were transfigured into physical objects exposed to decay, tampering, or theft?" This brings us to an even darker possibility. What if one could steal a memory by transfiguring it? Imagine a skilled legilimens extracting a key memory and transforming it into a necklace before the victim realizes. Now the necklace holds the only true record of that moment. Destroying the necklace would destroy the memory forever. Conversely, if the memory is restored to the pensieve, the victim might recover what was stolen. This is not theory, but a magical crime waiting to happen. A silent war over memories of secrets, betrayals, and identity. One cannot help but remember Bertha Jorkins, a ministry witch whose mind had been broken by memory charms. Voldemort extracted deeply buried information from her before killing her. Bertha Jorkins had a lot of useful information, he told Wormtail. The idea that memories, even buried and altered, could be forcefully accessed suggests the mind is not an inviolable sanctuary. If memories can be extracted and altered, why not removed and transfigured? Why not shaped into charms, sold on a black market of experience, or kept in private collections like enchanted artifacts? Let's imagine an illegal wizarding ring in Knockturn Alley, dealing not in cursed items, but in bottled or solidified memories. You could buy the triumph of a Quidditch final, the terror of a duel with Bellatrix Lestrange, or the first kiss of a Hogwarts romance. These would be real, not illusions, and might be sold in brooches, coins, gloves. The buyer need only wear them to feel the pulse of the past. A collector of memories could become addicted, seeking stronger, deeper, more forbidden recollections. Murders, betrayals, pleasures. Magic like this wouldn't just be dark, it would become a new form of consumption, eroding identity. Returning to the question of destruction, would destroying the transfigured object erase the memory? If the memory was removed from the mind, transfigured, and its original trace wiped or locked away, then yes. Destroying the object could mean annihilating a piece of a person's past. This opens terrifying doors. A person's truth could be destroyed by breaking a pendant, a war crime erased by burning a book, a secret affair obliterated by crushing a ring. Memories, once made material, might become the most fragile parts of existence. But what of reversal? Could the object be transformed back into memory and restored to its owner? If the magic were perfect, theoretically, yes. A gifted wizard, perhaps someone like Dumbledore or Nicholas Flamel, might devise a way to reintegrate the memory into the mind. The memory would again pulse through the original synapses with the full force of emotion and detail, but there is risk. Minds evolve. Reintroducing a memory, especially one long separated or modified by material form, could traumatize the mind or conflict with the identity that formed in its absence. Such magic also challenges the foundation of identity in the wizarding world. If memories can be stored, sold, erased, or stolen, what becomes of the self? Hermione Granger, always concerned with justice and mind integrity, erased herself from her parents' memories in Deathly Hallows. She modified their minds for their protection. I've also modified my parents' memories so that they're convinced they're really Wendell and Monica Wilkins. I've made them forget about me completely. She did it with grief and love. But imagine if, instead of modifying the memory, she had removed it and turned it into a pendant around her neck. A pendant she might break one day. Would that make her an orphan in reverse? A daughter without her own past? And what of magical heritage? If a memory of a family ritual, an ancestral spell, or a lost language were transfigured into a tome, and that tome lost, the entire legacy might disappear. This is more than sentiment, it is cultural erasure. The goblins and centaurs, already wary of wizard control over history, might see this as the ultimate theft, the ability to remove memories of injustice, transfigure them into art, and bury them in museums or vaults. There are whispers among magical theorists that Grindelwald once explored this path, not just for power, but to reshape history. If you could remove the collective memory of a people or bottle their grief into a physical object and seal it away, would they remember why they fight? Would they forget they were ever oppressed? Could tyranny be enforced by erasing history, one memory at a time? This is no longer magic. It is psychological warfare wrapped in elegant transfiguration. Yet not all uses would be dark. A grieving mother might transfigure the memory of her child's laughter into a charm she wears close to her heart. A war veteran might preserve the camaraderie of his final battle in a medal that whispers songs of the fallen. This would be tender, restorative, human. Magic used not to forget but to honor. Yet how long before such artifacts are abused? A memory, no matter how sacred, is still vulnerable once outside the mind. If this branch of transfiguration were ever formalized, let's call it memoric transfiguration, it would demand the strictest laws, the most disciplined minds, and ethical clarity. A Hogwarts curriculum could never risk teaching it to students who still transfigure hedgehogs into pincushions. It would be a subject for unspeakables, buried in the Department of Mysteries beside time travel and death. Perhaps it already exists there? There is a temptation to see this all as theoretical, fantasy even within a fantasy, but the precedent is there. Pensives, legilimency, memory charms, sentient diaries, soul-infused rings. Every element is known. What is unknown is how far a wizard might go. Not every wand wielder is content with observing memories. Some want to possess them, wear them, or destroy them. And if memory is the soul's echo, then the transfiguration of memory is the reshaping of self. The question, in the end, is not whether it can be done, but whether anyone should ever be allowed to try. Number 26. Why isn't transfiguration used to cover up crimes? The world of magic is layered with wonders, and yet its greatest mysteries often stem not from what magic can do, but from what it seemingly does not. Among these perplexities lies the silent conundrum of transfiguration. In a world where spells can twist form and matter, where a teacup can become a tortoise and a ferret can wear the face of a boy, one question lingers with eerie persistence. Why is transfiguration not used more often in the concealment of crime? It is not as though the magical world lacks criminals. The Death Eaters left a trail of terror during both Wizarding Wars. The Department of Magical Law Enforcement has its hands full with curses, hexes, and vanishing spells, and the shadows of Nocturne Alley have long harboured secrets darker than the night itself. And yet, transfiguration, this astonishingly potent branch of magic, rarely, if ever, appears as a tool for hiding the aftermath of crime. Imagine the hypothetical scene. A wizard stands in a clearing, wand shaking in hand, breath ragged. A body lies at his feet. Fear grips his heart. He knows he has moments before someone arrives. In that fleeting moment, what could be more efficient than pointing the wand at the corpse and whispering a spell to transfigure it into a stone or a patch of grass? He could then scatter the disguised remains across a field or hide them in plain sight. And yet, even in the darkest corners of magical lore, such practices are barely mentioned. There are no records of Aurors finding a murdered man turned into a suitcase or a stack of bones tucked into a bookshelf in the form of parchment. Why? Albus Dumbledore himself, the master of transfiguration and former professor of the subject at Hogwarts, once stated, "Transfiguration is some of the most complex and dangerous magic you will learn at Hogwarts. Anyone messing around in class will leave and not come back." These are not idle words. The implications are clear. Transfiguration is dangerous and, perhaps more importantly, traceable. Magic, after all, leaves a residue, a signature, something like fingerprints for wands. Could it be that the Ministry of Magic, particularly the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, possesses ways to detect these traces? In Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince, when Dumbledore and Harry investigate the Horcrux hidden in the cave, Dumbledore performs complex spells that detect concealed magic. This scene hints at an underlying truth of the magical world. Enchantments leave echoes. If a rock was once a human being, perhaps it carries a signature, a shimmer of its original form, like a faint heartbeat in stone. Wizards trained to detect magical residue might be able to unravel the spell, read the layers of transfiguration, and peel away the illusion. This might explain why such a method of hiding crimes is rare. Not because it is impossible, but because it is risky. Turning a body into a barrel of nails might fool the untrained eye, but not a skilled aura. The magical world, for all its chaos, has its own sense of law and order. Magical forensics, a concept hinted at in the Ministry's various departments, might include spells to detect alterations in the nature of matter, the kind of alterations that transfiguration causes. But what if the criminal is powerful? What if the transfigurer is someone like Bellatrix Lestrange, capable of fierce and complex magic, driven by fanaticism? Wouldn't she be capable of hiding her crimes in this way? After all, Bellatrix was no stranger to cruelty or deception, and yet even among the Death Eaters there is no recorded use of transfiguration for concealment. Voldemort, the most cunning of all, buried his secrets in enchanted objects, but not once did he turn a victim into an object to hide a murder. He split his soul into Horcruxes, not his victims into bricks and stones. Perhaps the truth lies not just in magical detection, but in magical ethics. Professor McGonagall, a transfiguration expert, often emphasized that transfiguration is not merely a matter of technique, but of responsibility. Turning a body into a feather duster may seem effective, but the spell is temporary unless made permanent with powerful enchantments. which few dare to perform on living, or once living, beings. Moreover, a failed transfiguration can lead to catastrophic consequences. What if the object regains its original form? What if the spell begins to wear off? In such a case, a hidden body could resurface unexpectedly, revealing both the crime and the criminal.